What's up, YouTube? This is the action figure grader, also known as John, coming back with yet another video today. This is my third video of the day, so clearly I'm on way too much caffeine, and I'm still way too excited about my recent purchases, which I detailed in another video. But I thought one other topic that has come up among people who have seen my collection and my friends who think I'm a loser for collecting this stuff, but they still ask the questions. One question I get is, what does the plus symbol mean next to some of the grades that you get back from AFA or CAS or UKG? And it's a fairly recent addition to by the grading companies, and so I thought I'd go through what that means, as well as some other kind of tangentially related topics related to grading and the numerical systems that they use. So these are four G.I. Joe figures. The two on the left are Takara Japanese-backed 1986 G.I. Joes. The one on the far left is Torpedo. The one right here is Flint. They were issued in Japan, as you can tell by the rows of disciplined insects, also known as Japanese writing. And the two on the right are American, U.S.-backed G.I. Joes. First, we have the 1986 Battle Android Trooper, BATS, as well as the 1986 Hawk. So let's take each one of these figures individually, and I'll discuss the scores with you and kind of the differences between the scores and what to look for when you're buying figures either online or on eBay, things like that. So anyway, the first figure, going left to right, is Torpedo. Again, this is the 1986 Takara G.I. Joe Japanese release. As you can see by the grade, it received an 80+. So what does that mean? And it's also, this is in the archival case, which I sent this off to grading about 2 or 3 months ago. It just came back last week. And I always get archival cases for G.I. Joes, which I will explain why a little bit later on in this video. That's called a teaser in the industry, folks. That's called a teaser. You got to stay tuned. But anyway, this received a card score of 80, a bubble score of 85, and a figure score of 85. And it only came back in 80+. Well, what does that mean? You know, if you got a 80, 85, 85, you would think that, you know, averaging those numbers out would get you to an 85 or a near mint plus grade, which is, you know, about the highest you can usually get for a vintage G.I. Joe figure. You see 90s occasionally, but they're very, very expensive and very rare. But why did it get an 80+ versus an 85, even though two of the scores were 85s? Well, again, I don't have insight into the AFA and how they actually score things, but this is how I interpret it. And please, viewers, correct me if I'm wrong, because I usually am. But the reason it received an 80+ is because I think that the card score, it did score an 80, but I think it was closer, that 80 score was closer to a 75 than it was an 85. So even though the bubble and the figure both received 85s, you know, the 80 score is really kind of like a A- score, you know, that you might get in school. It's not really an A. So that 80 was low enough to drag down the score back into the below an 85. So that's why it did receive the 80+ score. And, you know, I think that if it had been higher, you know, I've seen some figures, which I'll show you in a little while, where one of the scores was an 80, yet the final overall score was an 85. So that clearly there are differences between one 80 to the next. And so you got to keep that in mind, you know, when you're looking at figures online, is that, okay, this received an 80+, why did it receive an 80+? Well, the reason is because this card, at least viewed by the graders, was not close enough to an 85. And, you know, looking at the card itself, you know, you got some edge wear down here, and you got some very, very light edge wear up here. So my guess is if one or two of those negatives was not there, it probably would have gotten that a higher 80 or an 85 outright and received the final overall score of an 85. But because that 80 was really kind of closer to a 75 rather than really, really closer to an 85, it got the 80 plus score. And so that's what that plus means. There is no negative. There's no like 80 minus or anything like that. The scoring system would go from 80 to 80 plus to 85. So that's how the new grading system works. And I'll give you an example of another figure that received the exact same subscores, yet it received the 85 overall score. And so this is the 86 Flint. It is a beautiful figure, one of my favorite characters from the G.I. Joe series. So show you the back. And then, with regard to the score it received, when I sent it in, the bubble got an 80, the bubble got an 85, the card got an 80, and the figure got an 85 with an overall score of 85. Exact same subscores as your torpedo. Yet this one received an overall 85 near mint plus versus an 80 plus that the torpedo received. So what does that mean? Well, that means that this 80 score for the card was clearly closer to an 85 than the torpedo was. So they were able to round it up and give me the overall score of an 85, which I was very, very pleased with. As an aside there, I bought this separately from a seller who was a naturalized American U.S. citizen living in Japan, and he has got a huge collection of these Takaras, and I found this one in an auction for him, and I think I paid about $70 for it, and another 45 or so in grading. I did get the upgraded archival case. And so to get an overall near mint plus score on this was just awesome. These things can go for several hundreds of dollars already graded like this. I think I saw one on eBay that just sold for $4.99. So to be able to find one for $70 and then only have the grading costs was pretty awesome. And I did mention, I teased it earlier, and now it's time for the payoff. I did mention why to get the archival cases. Well, I think for G.I. Joes it's important, at least in my opinion. The archival cases have the upgraded UV protection. The standard AFA cases, they're about 60 to 70% UV resistant. The archival cases are advertised at least as being 100% or 99.9% UV resistant. And the reason I get those especially for these vintage Joes, is because these vintage G.I. Joes, as anyone who collected the G.I. Joes or played with the G.I. Joes back in the 80s, well, you know that the rubber bands that hold the figures together can dry rot and snap. And so my hope is that by getting the archival cases that minimizes the amount of UV that gets exposed to these figures, that those rubber bands will not snap. That being said, they could snap at any moment. So, these figures are, 30 plus years old. And if you're looking through the forums for G.I. Joe, it's very, very common to have these AFA graded figures and to have the rubber bands snap after the grading process, which stinks because then you're left with a big pile of plastic pieces inside the bubble if it happens to fall apart in the wrong way. So hopefully that doesn't happen with these anytime soon, at least while I'm alive. After I'm nothing but worm food and in the ground, I'm sure that my progeny, also known as my children, will sell these for a huge profit and then blow it all on hookers and drugs. Hopefully that's not the case, though. And they just live a long, happy life in my collection. And so I got two other examples that going back, getting way off subject here, but going back to the plus discussion and the subgrade discussion. Let's take the bat, for example. This is another figure that I purchased ungraded and sent in for grading. And, it received a nice camera work again, John. This received a card score of 85, a bubble score of 80, and a figure score of 85. Well, it received an overall 85 near mint plus, with the bubble being the only 80 score on this. And it is unpunched. It's a beautiful card. I really like the figure a lot. The bat is just one of the coolest figures from the mid. It was kind of during the heyday of the G.I. Joes, but anyway, the reason I did not expect that high of a score is, and I don't know if the light will catch it or not, but the bubble right here, you can kind of see it. The bubble was heavily scratched, and I hope that shows up in the video. When I received this from the seller ungraded, I was like, oh man, he didn't disclose that. This is going to get a bad score now. I'll be lucky to get a 75 because of those heavy scratches. And when I got this back, a week or so ago from AFA, I was shocked that it got an 85. Me personally, I would not have given this an 85 score because those scratches are really heavy. I hope it's showing up in the video, but I was hoping for an 80. I was expecting a 75, and to get an 85 was just to me. I think that's a very, very high score. The only thing I can think of is because these 85s were so strong, and that 80, for whatever reason, they did not ding me enough in terms of score for those scratches, that they went ahead and rounded up to an 85. To me, this is at best an 80 figure, but I'll take it if you know what I mean. These bats are very expensive. The 85 graded bats usually sell, I don't know, $400 to $500 minimum, when they're in this kind of condition. But I was very surprised that it got that high of a score. So that's that. Last one, to continue our score discussion and kind of how the scores can vary, a lot. We have a Hawk. This one is graded, I'll zoom in just a little bit so you can see the figure. The card received an 85, the blister an 85, and the figure a 90, which, you do see sometimes, but, the figure is, in great shape. The paint applications are great. There's no wear or anything like that, or factory blemishes. But, this could have received an 85 plus. That's another score that's possible. But clearly those two 85s that are received were closer to 80s than they were, 90. And so it held it back to an 85. I'm not complaining, believe me. This is an 85 near mint plus 1986 figure. So, I'm very happy with that figure. But, it just shows you that there is some rounding that goes on behind the scenes, in the AFA process and the grading process. So, keep that in mind as you're looking at figures. For example, I've seen many Star Wars figures and many G.I. Joe figures that have an overall grade of an 85, where the card is an 85 or a 90, the blister is an 85 or a 90, but the figure is an 80. Me personally, I would never spend the amount of money, the premium that's attached to an overall 85 score, where the figure subgrade received an 80, because that means that they, AFA noted some blemishes or some factory defects or some paint application problems on the figure, but it wasn't enough to hurt the overall score and take it from an 85 to an 80. But me personally, if I'm going to spend that kind of money, I'm not buying one with a subgrade figure of an 80. It just, to me, that's the most important one, because that's what you're really buying is a figure. The packaging is great. The packaging is important to grade, but to spend the amount of money that is attached, the premium that's attached with buying an 85 or higher graded vintage figure, me personally, I would recommend avoiding ones where the subgrade for the figure is not at least an 85. That's me. That's my opinion. I'm sure there's people out there that disagree with that, but that's my personal opinion on it. But anyway, I hope that helped clears up what the plus means on some of the newer graded figures back from AFA. I think they added that in the last few years, or maybe a year or two. I don't know exactly when they started it, but I like it because it helps differentiate between a regular run-of-the-mill 80 versus an 80 that is almost an 85. It helps it's a succinct way to allow the buyer or the owner know where that really falls on the grading scale, it's a nice feature to have. So I can't believe that I've rambled on about this for almost 14 minutes. I'm really, really sorry. I take it back. But thank you for watching it if you actually made it through this entire video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.